If you were to give a sort of grade to Elon Musk's handling of Twitter so far, what would your honest opinion and assessment be?
That is a tough question. He has certainly done some things that just leave me scratching my head. Uh, right.
For
And
sure.
then, but look, here's the problem. The man is nothing if not enigmatic,
Mm.
right? I- I'm pretty good at figuring out what motivates people. I think Elon Musk has a world saving impulse. I think that's why he's focused on Mars. I think that's why he's focused on Neuralink. I think I think he's a guy who, frankly, he's been public about the fact that his upbringing was no picnic. Maybe he's fleeing some demons, maybe being very, very busy with really interesting stuff is how he avoids them. But I do think if you listen to some of the things that he said, on Rogan's program, for example, I think he genuinely likes humanity. He appreciates it, which many people do not, but he seems to. And he wants, because he's in the privileged position he is in of having influence and having a tremendous amount of wealth that he can spend to alter the chessboard. I think he's trying to save the place. And in that capacity, Twitter does play a special role. Um, I have coined the phrase zero is a special number to signify a particular a subtle game theoretic reality that I think people need to be aware of, which is if you had a single university that said, forget this equity stuff, we are going to seek truth wherever that leads us, everybody would want to send their kid there, right? That's obviously going to be the best university there is. There's no question about it. A truth-seeking university is way better for making your kid smarter than an equity-focused university. So why then, given that any university could do this and be the top university, do none of them do it? Because there's a force that has to synchronize them all on the wrong message in order for that wrong message to be viable. So how that force works, different question, but that it needs to be zero universities escape is a fact. Same thing goes for newspapers. If there was one newspaper that also said, no, we're not interested in this intersectional blah, blah, blah. What we're interested in is figuring out what's actually taking place and what it means. That'd be the newspaper we'd all subscribe to. We'd love that newspaper, right? It'd be a slam dunk business wise. There's no argument that this could fail, but there isn't one. How could that be? Right. So this is true across domain after domain. And it's certainly true in social media space. If there was a social media platform, a big one where everybody could gather and you could say whatever you thought needed saying, that'd be the obvious place to go. Who wants to live in some artificially pruned environment where somebody is so interested in protecting you from the damage of hearing something wrong that they're going to prevent it from even being said? Nobody wants to be treated like a child, right? We want to go to we don't want to hear people shouting profanity, denying the Holocaust, whatever it might be. But frankly, if I've got to choose between hearing the occasional bit of profanity and the occasional Holocaust denier, and I get to hear actual people discussing important things that matter to me and my family and our well-being, I'll take the place where I hear the occasional thing that's awful, right? As would most people. So why doesn't that thing exist? Well, now we know that I was right about the zero is a special number thing, because Elon Musk buys Twitter. He nominally attempts to make it into that place. And what happens? Oh, suddenly we're seeing journalists reporting on how actually electric cars are bringing out the worst in us, right?
Mm.
Elon Musk is now a right-wing figure, right, engaged in some kind of misogynistic, patriarchal, whatever, right? There's just an engine that's going to portray him as something that he isn't in order to prevent his Twitter play from working. Oh, this doesn't work. Twitter's actually doing better than it was. So what happens next? Okay, the blue team starts fleeing Twitter for Mastodon, because if you can't stop them from making Twitter into a free space, you can turn it into a space that you can then dismiss as right wing because the left wingers have fled, right? So anyway, my point is there are going to be a dozen of these plays to make Twitter not be a actually free public square of where everybody gathers and discusses the important stories of the day. In such an environment, Musk is a very unusual entity. He seems to care less what people say about him than most of us, and that is some kind of superpower, right? It allows him to steer into the storm and to laugh it off and to innovate, frankly, some responses that at first might seem juvenile, but are actually very clever. You know, when CNBC tries to get you to comment in some way that they are then going to turn into evidence of your right-wing lunacy, and you send back a poop emoji, right? There's nothing in the journalistic playbook about what you do. You know, you can't say he didn't comment, right? He did comment. So anyway, my point would be, I think a couple things are true. Musk makes big errors. It is also true that Musk often corrects his big errors, right? He seems to be of the mindset that one accomplishes great things by failing often. There's a phrase, I've forgotten what it is, but something, you know, you fail early, often you correct your errors. You basically evolve towards something functional. So I'm hesitant to judge what I consider to be massive errors in the Twitter environment because I can't see the chessboard the way he can. On the other hand, it does seem like, for example, if you're committed to free expression, to free speech, and you bought Twitter because you want it to be a free speech platform, then one thing you shouldn't be doing is degrading the access that other free speech platforms have through Twitter. So I'm very troubled by what he's done with Substack, right? And what that he has not been clear about why he's done it, right? I can see that there's a business conflict between these two entities, but it is also the case that if Musk is trying to save the world and free speech is an important component, then partners in providing a new public square in which free speech is the central value ought to be protected, not threatened. So I don't know why he did that, and I would counsel him not to. I would counsel him to undo it. Likewise, the new CEO, Yacarino. It's pretty hard to get past her World Economic Forum bona fides, and it's pretty hard to get past some of her background with respect to ideology. Now, the CEO of a privately held company is a different entity than the CEO of a publicly held company, but nonetheless, it did feel like a finger in the eye to many of us who have been fighting against tyranny and trying to defend Musk in his acquisition of Twitter. So anyway, the answer to your question is I would give Elon more room to navigate in ways that I don't understand than just about anybody, because he's proven that he's very, very good at this, right? So I am ready to hear that there's some explanation for Yacarino that doesn't, immediately occur to me, but it's hard for me to imagine what it would sound like, right? And frankly, my guess is they run afoul of each other. Maybe that has already happened. Now, she hasn't officially started, but maybe she had something to do with what happened with What is a Woman, and the weirdness where they reversed course on that is somehow downstream of this, and maybe we get a couple more of those, and then Yacarino is removed. I wouldn't be shocked.
The one I've really struggled with with Twitter is the whole blue tick situation, in which really struck me the other day when I received a call from a company. I was trying to buy a product and they were asking me for details, and I thought, hold on, I thought this number it sounds a bit like a scam here, so I hung up. I took the number. I went onto their Twitter to try and find the number that they advertise in terms of their help department. And then because there was no tick there, I thought, oh, I don't know if I can kind of trust this as much as I normally would. And so I'd love to ask you, because you're a public figure. You've got, I think it's 700,000 followers on Twitter. It doesn't really mean much to me, because if someone wanted to impersonate me, they could, conjure up a couple of hundred followers, and people wouldn't know the difference. But for someone like you, if someone took the time, and I believe they can, to try and replicate your profile in terms of number of followers, they could buy followers, for example, go through and make their Twitter, copy your tweets for X amount of months, and then pay for a blue tick. Is that something that worries you at all?
Yeah, quite a bit. And in fact, I believe we have entities like this. Ed Krasnstein and his brother.
Okay.
These guys, I don't know what the story is. I haven't followed them carefully. I haven't followed them at all, frankly, but I did notice they suddenly showed up in my timeline just nonstop. And I was like, who are these people? And then I looked at their accounts and, oh, huge numbers of followers. How don't I know who this person is? And then there's some sordid story where they bought accounts that were already popular that had nothing to do with them. And I don't know what it is, but it all feels very inorganic. And of course, the blue check mark can be thrown onto any account now just by buying it. So in my opinion, what we really should be doing is there should be a blue check mark or some check mark. That blue check mark should be only a hallmark that your identity has been established by Twitter, that they know who you are, and that you are not going to be able to make multiple accounts. To the extent that you do something awful, your reputation should follow you, right? And so it shouldn't carry any connotation. I mean, the irony here is, you can look at Heather in my account. Okay, I do have, I think it's 900,000 something followers. Heather has, I don't know, is it 300,000, something like that?
Yeah.
Now, part of that may be downstream of the fact that I got in just under the wire, right? Right after Evergreen happened, my account, I literally had 400 followers when Evergreen happened, right? I had abandoned Twitter. I'd walked away. It felt like talking into a void, right? So I had 400 followers. Evergreen happened, and suddenly, I think it was like a week, I was at 30,000, right? And so it was like, oh boy, this is now something, you got to be careful with. You can get yourself in trouble if you got a lot of followers. But anyway, I applied for verification, and Twitter at the time was still, there was some vestige of its initial purpose for blue checks, which was to establish that you are who you say you are if you are an account that is something somebody might impersonate, right? So anyway, if you were notable and you could establish who you were, they would give you a blue check mark, or that's what they said. And in my case, that's what they did, even though they later put their thumb on the scales and interrupted my ability to reach people. At the time that I got my blue check, they hadn't yet decided I was an enemy. Heather applied shortly thereafter and was told that they had suspended the program. They weren't verifying anybody because it had become a hallmark of, it had become a sanction. It had become a mark of Twitter having declared you legitimate and important, right? It was a badge of honor somehow. And so Twitter said it didn't like this. But then in the years that it was suspended, that you couldn't get a blue check mark, no matter who the hell you were, right? They gave them out, and they gave them out to all kinds of people. They gave them out. There was a friend of mine unearthed one case in which they had given one to a CCP shill with, I think, under 1,000 followers. Absolutely not noteworthy. Absolutely not what it said it was. It was the opposite of what Twitter claimed that this should be. And so anyway, their behavior in that period where they did not have a official program for getting validated or verified What they did is they turned it into exactly what they claimed they didn't want it to be. It was a Twitter sanction. They refused to give it to notable people who they didn't like, and they gave it to people who weren't notable that they did like. And so it was this, schoolyard bullshit thing. But it could be that you could take the sanction aspect out of it, and you could use it purely as an indication that something is really what it says it is, that it doesn't have multiple presences that are all verified. In other words, you should be playing with your real reputation. In my opinion, we should avoid anonymity. If I were running it, I would probably not have anonymity, which makes some of my friends very upset because they're using anonymity to good ends. But I think the net impact of anonymity is very negative. But nonetheless, you could have a blue check mark that worked. The way it's set up now, you absolutely don't. It's maybe a step in the right direction, but I don't think so. I think you really need a program. I think what Elon did was he built something that you could do cheaply. And I think the problem is, if you're trying to solve the problem that a blue check mark could potentially solve, there isn't a cheap solution. You're going to need to do something that actually individually establishes the identity. And then when that happens, do you have a blue check?
Or I do not. I do not.
You do not. One thing that was true back in the days when blue checks were not something you could buy officially, that they opened a tab inside your Twitter app that allowed you to only look at activity of other verified accounts.
Yeah.
Which was obviously highly arbitrary. Heather wasn't verified, so her activity wouldn't show up, for example, and it certainly should. She's a person whose opinion ought to matter to just about anybody. But it did mean that the bots, right, the huge armies of things that try to steer conversation could be filtered out with one click, right? So a system that did that said, look, if you want some vast, unregulated sandbox of people who have figured out how to produce 1,000 accounts that all say the same thing, you can do that, but I don't want to be part of that Twitter. I'm going to go into the part of Twitter that doesn't have that, and the blue check could do that. But I do think a real verification system would have to be underneath it.